Hello and welcome to episode 29 of Socratic Satsang. Our topic for the day is what is the truth? The truth is defined as a state or quality of being true. But how do we get there? How do we define what's true or how do we arrive at the truth? Another question is, can there be only one truth? Or is there room for multiple contradictory truths to exist at the same time? So let's get into the discussion. Over to our first speaker.
So I'm just going to bring a concept from interior design because I thought it actually applies. So there's a color in interior design that most interior designers love and hate, and it's gray. So gray is one of those colors that if you change the furniture around the colors, the gray attaches to that and looks different. And if it has a window with a different light, the gray can look darker or lighter, more brown, more green. So gray is one of those colors that is so versatile. That's why it's used in interior design, like in just about everything you do. You know, you guys are probably going to be noticing that. So I thought that's a great analogy for the truth, because a lot of the times truth is gray. There's so many angles and there's so many variants and there's so many things that can change how we see things. And so I was just trying to understand, nowadays, especially, it's so hard to understand the truth because it doesn't matter what aspect of something we are looking, we are never going to have the full truth, or we are going to have one aspect, just like in interior design. You know, if you shine it with the light from the west or the south, it will look different. And so I just wanted to say that for me personally, I don't believe there's an absolute truth. It's something that as much as we want, we can try to look from as many aspects or as many angles as we can. And that would help us get closer to it. But truth is something that, you know, we aspire to get, but I think it's difficult. Maybe not impossible, but I don't know if that's the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulina. Over to you, Denise.
Thank you. Just pulling from some of Paulina's comments, truth is very difficult to define, even on an individual level. So a single person can interpret an event through their beliefs, past experiences, emotions, and assumptions. And that interpretation can feel completely true to them. But that doesn't mean that it reflects what actually happened. So the complexity of truth doesn't begin when multiple people are involved. It begins with each of us. And when someone's personal interpretation interacts with others, it can shape relationships and outcomes in very real ways. A belief may feel valid internally, yet be inaccurate externally. That raises an important question. Is it helpful or harmful for someone to hold the version of truth they've created? Does it contribute to clarity, or does it distort reality in a way that affects others? And this is where the philosophical tension emerges. There's a term for that we did a podcast on that I can't recall the name of at the moment. So there is this internal subjective truth someone experiences, and there's the external truth that can sometimes be verified, like through evidence in a situation involving a crime. And those two layers don't always align. So maybe the most useful way to think about truth might be to recognize that it has multiple dimensions. And of course, I have to bring metaphysics into this. So the personal story that we tell ourselves the observable facts and the larger context, we can't always fully see. So each of us plays a role, but none stands alone as kind of the full picture. And then the conversation then isn't just about identifying what's true. It's also about understanding the impact of our interpretations. So how does a particular belief shape our actions, our relationships, or the way we move through the world? And at what point does holding on to a personal truth support us or interfere with reality altogether? So just some of the things that I've been thinking about.
Wonderful. That was deep. Thank you, Denise. Over to you, Drake.
Okay. I agree with a lot of what was said already. And Denise touched on some of it about different types of truth. Um, there's the personal truth, as was talked about here a bit. And there's, according to Neil deGrasse Tyson, his view of it seems to be that there's three types of truths, just broadly speaking. The personal truth. So that's, as we talked about, whatever truth you hold yourself from all the beliefs you've had and everything else, and the view, the angles you've seen things at, what you've heard, all that combines to make your personal truth. Then there's a political truth, and that's more of what a society sees and what a society believes. Certain things like the Constitution, and that the society believes that you have these rights and everything else. And that's what he calls the political truth. And then there is, when I think of truth, and I think a lot of people do, is the objective truth, what is actually really true. And that's the hardest one to get to, because all of us have our other perceptions, and a lot of times we don't have all of the information. We don't see things holistically. We see it with our view, so we don't get to that objective truth. But there's always those different truths there. If anybody's involved in watching it, it's very hard as a person to see it purely, clearly, just the objective truth, unless you're looking at cold, hard facts and not trying to interpret them with your background, just looking purely at what's there. Something like, we can go out now, excuse me, you can go out into space and see physically that the Earth is round. So that's the truth. It's not flat. People might hold that belief, and that belief to them might be true because that's all they've ever seen, is everything looks flat to them. They can see off in the horizon, and they have their reasons. They believe that. And that's, for them, that's true, but that's not the objective truth when you look at all the facts that are there. But there is something that I had that demonstrates that really well. So if you can see this image I just shared, it's a representation of different views, how one person can see one thing as the square shadow on the left, and to them that's true. That's what it is. You see the one that looks on the left of your screen, that's your square, and that's with that sort of peach color light would be coming from the one side and giving you that. Going to the back with the bluish light, there's your circle. And obviously when you look at what's causing that shadow or what's casting it, it's more of a cylinder. So you're seeing it from a different view and getting the whole picture and getting to the truth, not a portion of the truth or the personal truth. And that can be very deceiving, because you can see one person is going to swear it's square, the other one's going to swear that it's a circle. And that's how we get conflict, even though what both people are seeing is accurate, or at least they believe is accurate. So I'll leave it there, and I'll give it back to you.
Thank you. Over to you, Kevin, followed by Tulip. Yes.
Okay. When looking at the truth, I just remember a discussion or a disagreement I had with my wife, and where I would say, no, I will do that. And then I would forget. And you said you were going to do that. and you didn't do that, so I did it instead. And sometimes it'll be, did I say that? I thought I didn't. I thought I did, but maybe I didn't. So it's also the person, what you may say something, but what do they hear? And for people in a relationship, communication is always important, and it's always something that needs to be, you know, worked on. So I know I've been together with Karen for quite a while, but even this week we would still have a disagreement as to, I thought you wrote that in the calendar, and yes, I wrote it into this calendar, and she meant another one. And so it's things that you have to work on. And from a personal point of view, communication needs work always. And in personal relationships, which are the most important to me, it's worth the work. Thank you.
Tulip, over to you.
So, a lot from everyone, especially the last one, Drake, and of course, when he spoke. Sorry. So truth is, so when I create a painting or a piece of artwork, and like Drake mentioned about, people viewing it from a different point, right, with the truth. So it's similar. When I create it, it depends on who's looking at it. Somebody would look at the texture. Someone would see the depth. Someone would see the colors, the blending, and some would interpret it as figures or their own story, right? So that's again, and that is the truth. It's like there, right in front of you. It's this painting that you've created. And there's it's also cultural. I think it's like when you speak about countries and law, or then companies create their own set of rules. So that is one. And then you have and very often you have people speaking about, it could be about a subject, it could be a scene, a story, or about someone else. So very often I share this, that don't take it personally if you've heard about yourself through someone, or if you've read about something about yourself, because people have their own narrative and they view the world with their story. So if you are the kind to view the world in a certain way, like someone's always happy for someone, they're celebrating, or someone else would be, speaking not highly or negative, that's nothing got to do with the person they're speaking about. It's purely what they have, and they are showing their truth, not the other person's truth. So these are a couple things that came to me just now.
Thank you. Yes, Joe, over to you, brother.
Yeah, I think this several of our contributions have sort of teed it up nicely for me. So thank you. So the example of the cylinder is often used as a classic illustration of what we call intersubjectivity, and it's saying that when we talk about, let's say, objective truth, most of the philosophers come down on the side is we just can't get there. To Paulina's point, we'd love to get there, we just never can really fully know something in itself. And remembering Friedrich Nietzsche, one of his great quotable quotes, of which he has many, it's, there are no facts, there are only interpretations. So that idea that there are so many perspectives that come into play. To Tulip's point, it's interesting that my favorite philosopher right now, the one that I just can't let go of, is this guy, Hans-Georg Gadamer from Germany. In the early 60s, he wrote a book usefully called Truth and Method. And even more interestingly, his entire initial approach to what is truth starts with art and the experience of art, which of course had people all freaked out. This was like the early 60s was the high period of analytic philosophy. So this guy comes out and says, let's talk about art. People going, what? What? But it really was, he used it as a way to really explore the fact that when multiple viewers or participants approach a work of art, they're experiencing it differently. But he said, well, what does this tell us about our experience of reality? And So I do think that there is a purposiveness of and a positionality of everybody's perspective on truth, on something out there, and that it's by almost like correlating them all. Like you put them all, like if you've got a group of people, one person saying it's a circle, another person, it's a square. But if they had to work it out, they could rationalize, they could figure out the fact that, maybe there's something going on here where what could be both of these things based on different perspectives. So you either get it through reasoning, or, as Drake said, you sort of get a broader sort of distance view of it to say, now I see what it is. But sometimes that's just not possible, but you can. So I will end with two particularly obscure comments, even for Joe. One is, of course, Plato had his famous definition of knowledge as justified true belief. And of course, in Plato, true basically meant, something transcendental. It was the big capitalized true. In other words, it was a form. It was outside of our experience entirely. And he said, okay, well, even if we set that aside for a second, because that, it carries with it a few implications, like that even if we don't buy into the idea of transcendental forms or something, we say, well, okay, well, then the concept true includes things like some kind of permanence, some kind of persistence, that multiple viewers can come to it and eventually come to some agreement, some consensus on what's there. And I think, you can, the really obscure, you could take that formula, basically, the justified true belief formula and the definition of knowledge, and rearrange it as you would a mathematical equation and rebalance it to say truth is almost like our knowledge, almost like divided by, or, so divided by our beliefs, our individual personal truth. So I'm not a big fan of the idea of personal truth, although it can have its bounded validity. I kind of think the word belief is awesome in that regard. And, and justified. In other words, it is articulated. It has, been explained. And that's how the group of people come to agree, oh, okay, we're looking at a cylinder here. So there are, it tells us a bit about what truth and our approach to truth can be. Finally, somewhere out there, I have to sort of get my blog re-kicked off again after my blogging platform literally disappeared. I had a list of aphorisms, and under the category of who to blame Joe, who to blame me, was my definition of truth, which was truth is a useful fiction. In other words, it is a construct that we make, and its merits as truth is in its utility, which sort of discloses my deep indebtedness to the pragmatists, but I'll stop there.
What is the truth? The Indian philosopher Swami Vivekananda once said, "The only reality in the universe is the truth." Later on in life, I realized that there can be multiple truths based on perception. So perception drives reality. What should we do when our truth or reality collides with another's truth or reality? As a peak performance coach, I take such moments as opportunities to introspect and to research. Be humble, be kind, be willing to change and adapt if required. I think it's important to respect others, to be humble about our own opinions, and to be open and willing to change if required, because humility, respect, and willingness to change are vital to our personal growth story. Thank you.
I just have one thing that I wanted to bring in, and it's a quote. And this is, I'm reading this book called The Master as I Saw Him. It's by Sister Nivedita, who was actually a follower of Swami Vivekananda. Can never say it correctly. But I loved what it said. And it just said, as a religious teacher, I saw that although he had a system of thought to offer, nothing in that system would claim him for a moment if he found that truth led elsewhere. And I just loved that quote because I think it is very easy for us to be stuck in what we've known, whether that is growing up culturally in a specific religion, political perspective, and that willingness to shift when the world does show us that there might be another way of seeing things that could lead us closer to the truth. So that's all.
Thank you, Kirsten. Over to you, Paulina, followed by Joe.
There you go. Yeah. So following what everybody have said, and we have already established that the truth or the personal truth is dependent on a perspective. So I'm willing to challenge that the lack of truth is also the lack of our unwillingness to look at other perspectives. The more we go on the rabbit hole of any concept, the more we isolate ourselves from other realities, the bigger the danger that we get stuck on that belief that we are in the truth, when in reality we're actually separating ourselves to the bigger, more universal part of what truth is supposed to be, or it is, because truth exists independent of the viewer. We seem to think that truth is a perspective. Actually, truth exists. The laws of the universe, gravity, whatever, anything, whatever, an accident that happened, a health concern, it exists whether we see it or not. But when people start looking at it from a perspective, I have, I'm dealing with on my personal life with a health issue, and there's so many points that are very different, and they all can explain what's happening to myself right now, and they're all so different, but they're all a lie as long as they don't acknowledge the other sides. And I find when it comes to dealing with the truth, if we actually want the truth, one of the words that comes to me is we need to leave arrogance to the side and acknowledge and embrace humility. Without humility, we cannot attain truthfulness. And I don't know the level of humility we must attain. It needs to be big, because truth is very difficult for all of us. We all have egos, and it's very difficult to shed that. But to me, that's in the pursuit of truth is also in the pursuit of acquiring humbleness. Thank you. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Drake, is that you next? I can't remember who is. Joe and then Tulip.
Just want to pick up on a couple things that were touched on. So both Kristen and Paulina touched on something really interesting to me, that the sort of, I guess, associated with phenomenology and my friend Gadamer, the idea that, for example, that you always approach approach reality with your perspective, your tradition, and he uses the words tradition and prejudice. And it's not like something we can just magically wave away or will away. It's essential. And in fact, what he did in this Truth and Method said, in fact, you have to start with a perspective. You have to see the circle, right? You have to see one of them, and then you then learn, and then to pick up on Paulina's point, the humility, you have to be open to stretching your the term that Gadamer uses is horizon, that you have to sort of expand your horizon to suddenly see that other perspectives have merit, and that it's by reconciling those and putting them together that you get a closer proximity. So the word I think that popped into my mind when Paulina's opening comments was asymptotic, that basically we can approach the truth, but we can never really lay claim to it entirely. Yeah, so I should probably stop there.
Thank you. Over to you, Tulip.
So I'm thinking like patterns revisited perhaps several times becomes the truth, right? That's one. And then I wonder what the relationship between power, ego, and the truth is.
Thank you, Drake.
Yeah, just touching on what Tulip said there about patterns repeating. become the truth. I think that's a lot of what you see in politics, and people who are trying to convince you of something. They will keep repeating something, even if you know it's not true. When you start out, once you've heard it so many times, people start to believe it, and it becomes true to them. And no longer is it something that's crazy. It's now, no, this is true and this is right. And it's again, if we want to refer to it, it's their personal truth, um, but it's not necessarily the objective truth. And um, I know we're talking about truth, and personal truth now is mentioned a lot, and I've been using it. Um, but I tend to think that's almost a bad description for it, because, like I say, it's not objectively true. It's more of a personal belief, uh, and there may be an honestly held opinion, honestly held belief, but it's still not necessarily the objective truth. And like was said before, that might be something you can never really get at, no matter how it's looked at in some circumstances. But we can certainly get closer.
Thank you, Drake. Tulip?
And there's this another observation when there's a conversation and someone would say that this is what happened, and the other person can say that, but this is in your head or it's in your mind. But then the person can say, but that's my reality and that's my truth. It's hard to tell.
Thank you, Tulip. Joe, did you have something to say? Yes.
Always, yes. Yeah. So actually, this tweaks a couple of things. So the description that Paulina started on, and then Tulip touched on, and then Drake ran with, this idea that, for example, I talked about that formula that Plato had, justified true belief. And one of the things that's interesting is the idea that, okay, well, if justification, basically the elaboration, the blah, 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 it's kind of ironic coming from Joe, but the blah, blah, blah runs out of control and starts to obscure people's experience of other things, and sort of overwhelms their truth, almost like, and we see that a lot with social media, where just the sheer volume of repetition of noise starts to sort of build people's beliefs. And both of those things may have nothing to do with anything looking like reality. And I think that's a really, so I'm now, again, back to Gadamer. One of the things he did, being a thorough Greek scholar, went back to Plato and said, well, one of the things that's, we don't have to go for the metaphysical forms with Plato, but we can appreciate the fact that he wrote these all as dialogues. It's actually the discussion, the interaction between all these personalities and their different perspectives. He said it's that process that's so valuable in Plato. And so that, by working out these things and basically coming to a consensus, basically, and the other phrase is the fusion of horizons. By interacting with each other, we come to share a stronger sense, and we actually do make a closer approach to the truth. And back to my pragmatism, and which is really keys on this concept of knowledge, it's the ability to act effectively. That if I describe something and then somebody else goes and builds a bridge based on that, if there is an underlying shared set of perspectives and accumulated experience that, well, this didn't work, it fell over, that then somebody can build a bridge successfully. And then we start to say, okay, that's the fiction that works.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next? Drake, over to you, brother.
I want to go back to something that Tulip had said early on. She had brought up art and talking about truth there. And it made me think about my photography and what's true. And when you look at a photograph, these days, it's different how people perceive them, because there's so much AI out there and people have a better understanding that things can be fake and not true. But a lot of times they'll still believe something is true because it's very realistic. But in the past, in the earlier days of photography, everyone believed it if it was captured. I mean, there were ghosts captured and things like that. And much later on, they found out they were just playing tricks on you with manipulating things. But when they saw that, that was their truth. This ghost was caught on film, and that was true to them. even though it wasn't true or factual at all. And when I go out and take photos, I pick a certain lens that I'm going to use. I focus on a certain area. I leave out certain things. And what you're seeing might actually be what's there, but it could be very deceptive with everything else that's there. If you think when you look in at the TV news or in a newspaper and you see this crowd that is so amped up and going to be violent and that could be just a few people that they're zoomed in on tight, right? And it could be very deceptive. So the truth is something that is hard to know and to perceive when you only have that one view, and unless you have a more holistic view of things, something you want to believe or used to believe in photography, video, and that's true, can be objectively not true and deceptive. But to you viewing it, it's your personal truth. You've seen it. And that, I think that applies to a lot of different areas, not just my photography or art, where you can paint what you want and that. But I just thought that was a great example brought up by Tulip initially.
Thank you. That was really well said. Thank you.
Yeah.
Tulip, over to you.
Yeah, Drake, thank you. This also it made me wonder, like, would truth be is truth transient, or like, as in, when we are younger, when we are kids, and somebody would be like a Superman or superhero for you, and today when you look at the same person, you're like, really? you know or anything, or you could have an opinion or your favorite toy or whatever, and today it doesn't mean anything to you, or the other way around, right?
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, okay. Going back to something that Tulip brought up. So we're coming back to Tulip. The idea of this, that everybody is sort of approaches the world with a narrative. And I'm going to try and use this to get back to the other question you asked, Tulip, about power, ego, and truth. And I think in one of our discussions, we touched on consciousness. And I said one of the ways that I find it's useful to think about consciousness or the self, it's a story. It's a narrative that it sort of accumulates over time, that we tell ourselves and that other people tell about us, and that somewhere in there, a self emerges. I do absolutely think, and so there's a whole, so the more recent philosophy has say the last 50, probably more, almost 100 years now, have completely trashed things like Cartesian dualism, that there is a separation between our subjectivity and objectivity. So a new book that I just got is literally, relativity and objectivity. And that basically saying that it's a false dichotomy, that because we always have these narratives, we're always telling a story, everything we experience is seen from that perspective. It is colored by that purposiveness, like we're trying. And so, basically almost like if we were to say it, that the current thinking today in philosophy is that you can't unbundle those. There is no pure objective place we can get to. But then back to the question of power, ego, and truth. Power is an interesting word, and it's, in a cute way, sort of a supercharged word. But in Latin, we would typically use the word potentia instead of, and so it's where we get both power and potential. So let's say in physics, for example, or in energy, we talk about potential. It's the potential to be able to do something. So rather than power to sort of compel someone else or to hold authority over someone else, it's more that in the most positive light, power can be the potential to do something and to be effective. And that gets you back to knowledge, and that gets you back to, you have to have sort of a repeatable perspective on the truth, or effective ways, back to useful fiction, effective ways to use something persistently so that what succeeded last week is going to work next week, and that someone else can pick up and run with as well. So I do think there's an interesting dynamic. The ego, it's almost like the home of the narrative, the story. Power, potential, being able to be effective, and truth being, you got to have your foot on something. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Joe. I'd like to add on to what Drake and Joe and Tulip have said. 20 years ago, I got into a relationship, and we were both well known people, which was covered by the press quite extensively. And for some reason, somebody in the press decided to say that we are married. We were never married. We tried to clarify that we aren't married, but the press wouldn't listen. There were articles and articles and articles. Our relationship ended 8 years ago. Articles continue even today saying we are married. And it is so strange, it's so difficult, but I guess with that power that the press has, they also need a sense of responsibility, which sometimes can be lacking. And I see this not just in my case, I see this in many cases where you can see that the press isn't being honest. I've seen situations where somebody hosts a party, not enough people turn up, but the press would take a photograph of one corner where there's 5 or 6 people bunched up and then release a write up saying that it was a wild hit of a party, or a president who's got tremendous energy. And the reporters who are with him say that they have to be awake at all times because of his energy, but he's listening to somebody during a meeting. He closes his eyes and a photograph is circulated saying he's asleep, he's tired, he's exhausted. Or when he's walking, they focus on something and say, look at him, he's about to die. And that kind of narrative is difficult to fight because when the press decides to do something, they can just go at it. And one needs to be able to have that sense of objectivity to know what the truth is. And in some cases, it's almost impossible to know because you don't have direct access to those people. So it is tough, and it is just a truth of the times that we live in. Thank you.
Yeah, Vin, you're right about the press, because especially nowadays it's so hard. So you got to use your own, you got to use your own sense and make sense of things, and not get swayed by what people are putting out there. It could be any kind of information, be it health, be it whatever work you're looking. It could be any topic. So yeah, it's important to just do your own research.
Yes, Kirsten.
I'm going to switch it a little, but I want to go back. I'm going to follow the trend and go back to something Tulip said. um, so this part on kind of that personal truth of, like, this is my personal truth. I think about that in sessions and I would, like therapy sessions or so forth, and people coming in and whatever they're experiencing, it is their personal truth. Absolutely. That's how they're seeing the world. That's how they're experiencing the world. And yet I would shift it from a personal truth to a personal experience. One of the tenets of cognitive behavioral therapy is that there's these distorted cognitions. There's something that is not aligning with reality, that's not aligning with the truth. And a big part of that is being able to challenge those things. Whether that's, of course, in the mental health field is going to be on the more negative side, right? That when we're really anxious or depressed, really down on ourselves, having all of these negative thoughts either about the world or internally, and being able to say, like, this is an experience, this is a perception, but this is not actually the truth. And so I think when we're talking personal truth, I think it's more personal experience. That's all.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Over to you, Denise.
So there's a movie, a film called Vantage Point, and I don't know if anyone's ever seen it. It is extremely interesting, and it takes everything kind of we've talked about and captures it into that definition of what is the whole truth. So what it is, it's a movie that shows one event, but it repeats that event through completely different characters' eyes. And what's fascinating is that every time the scene repeats, the truth seems to change. So not because the facts are changing, but because the vantage point does. So one character sees chaos, another sees intention, another sees only a fragment and misinterprets the rest. And by the end, you realize that no single perspective contains the whole truth. You only understand what happened when you integrate all the viewpoints. It's a perfect metaphor for how truth functions in real life, in my mind. Each of us is living inside our own vantage point, shaped by history, emotion, perception, often without realizing how much we're not seeing. So I just wanted to share about that movie because it really does encapsulate a lot of what we spoke about. Thanks.
I guess we're at the end of today's session. Thank you, everybody. Superb discussion, and looking forward to our next episode when we'll discuss something as exciting and as interesting as this time. Thank you. Bye-bye.